Welcome to the new video on isolated recovery environment. This is relatively a newer topic, and I chose this because of the relevance, specifically considering that the ransomware attacks are on the rise, and regulators are also asking, at least for the critical infrastructure, to be prepared with isolated recovery environment, which can be used as a protection against being resilient to the ransomware attacks. So what's an isolated recovery environment? It's a secure and segregated space for recovering critical systems and data in the event of ransomware attack. What does it mean? Basically, when a ransomware attack hits the data center, most of the time the data center and the disaster recovery centers are connected. Quite a few applications are available in active states. The databases are being written at the same time at both the places, and quite a few file sharing systems as well as other critical applications are sharing the data between DC and DR periodically, sometimes as less as few seconds to as high as 15 minutes to an hour, and quite a few other applications which are not very critical are sharing this information and data relatively at least once a day. So when ransomware infection happens, it not only infects the data center, but the Active Directory, which is kept at the disaster recovery centers, are also infected by forcing trust relationships and forcing the replication. Also, the lateral movement happens wherein the ransomware files are also being sent to quite a few systems which are connected to the disaster recovery environment too. Hence, it is high probability that when a ransomware infects specifically the AD, the systems which are connected to the AD, either at DC or DR or any other Active Directory environments, are prone to being encrypted when they log on by using login scripts, or they already have an encryption software during the time of lateral movement. So we need an isolated recovery environment, which means that an environment which is not connected to both data center and disaster recovery site. That's why it's called as isolated. It's an isolated one, but keeps connecting to the data to get the backup and then a clean room where the restoration can happen. So let's see quickly how does this work. So the key principles of isolated recovery environment is that it is physically or logically segregated, which means that the entire hardware, which means the servers, the applications, are separate in this environment, including the network environment, security tools, as well as firewalls. The second concept is that the infrastructure is dedicated, which means that if you are creating an isolated recovery environment, specifically the data vault as well as the clean room, then you need your own separate servers, storage, network devices, security devices, internet connection link, as well as firewalls and other point security tools, including further the backup environment dedicatedly for IRE. Hence, it is very costly to really maintain that. It has restricted access control. Only authorized people can access, should have multi-factor authentication, and one should very clearly deploy and develop certain processes to manage the IRE, to copy the data on a daily basis, to update the patches of security systems, to update the firewall rules, as well as to update the configurations, and then ensure by periodic testing that it is working appropriately. Now, as we saw that there are two major principles or components of an IRE, so we will see which are those two components. One is a data vault and second is a clean room. So if you see in this example, courtesy to the Huawei from where I got this, you have production system and all of the production servers like Active Directory, application servers, database servers, virtual machines. They all have agents, say for example, from Veritas or any other backup server system, and it is taking the backup to a central place. Most of the time, these backups are immutable, which means that they are warm. You can write once, but you can read many times. And these are tamper-proof, which means that they take a secure snapshot, they have storage-based encryption, and most of the time, quite a few systems are also having certain ransomware detection techniques, either through some machine learning based on IO operations or ability to read certain ransomware extensions and identify, or they take a snapshot. And if the file system being tampered with, then they have the ability to understand that there may be a ransomware infection. Now, if you look at it, what happens when you copy everything to a storage environment, which means that you centralize your storage on which you have application configurations, VM snapshots, structured and unstructured data getting backed up, configurations like sysvol folder, Active Directory, objects, and all other policies, etc., getting backed up. They are all getting backed up not only to the data center or a dedicated storage device in the disaster recovery, but you are also keeping an isolated zone, typically called as data vault, which is connected by air gap. Air gap means that it gets connected only for, say, 15 minutes to an hour, only for the purpose of replication, which is a one-way traffic, and then the data is copied to this isolated zone. If you only have an isolated zone for storage, which is typically called as data vault, then you are talking about a storage isolated recovery environment, wherein still you do not have a clean room of the servers. So in this isolated recovery environment, you have an anti-malware with machine learning, which basically checks for malwares. It scans all the files, including binaries, to identify if there are any infections of ransomware. They do it through machine learning by taking file system snapshot, comparing to the baseline, identifying known extensions, as well as if when the backup is happening, they identify malicious or a behavioral IO, then they identify that this may be a malware. And once it scans, it considers this as a clean copy. Hence, you can be sure that the data that you have copied from production storage from a central server to this IRE is free from any ransomware and is a clean copy. So as we said that there are two concepts here. One is obviously we need to have an immutable storage, which means that data cannot be modified even by the administrator. Once it is backed up, it's write once and read on many. So it has a credential, then it's get encrypted and it gets written, and it can only get written once by the system account, so that even administrator cannot modify. And there is a concept obviously of a data integrity, which means that we have a mechanism to verify the integrity of the backup by checksums as well as the replicated data before we restore. Now, I spoke about the AI-based malware scanning, which basically analyze the vault data for any behavioral indicator of compromise and corruption. So ransomware attackers, typically have a common characteristics like high random read operation or a forced encryption or a forced write, and you can have behavioral or high volume of IO or deletion of folders like sysvol. So a lot of these techniques can be read and understood by the anti-malware scanners, and they compare it with the baseline and identify anomalies, and then perceives whether it is a infected system's backup or not. If it is, then it highlights that so that you know that it's not a clean copy. It also intercepts files with specific extension when they are being written. There are pre-configured detection models with a lot of ransomware file extensions. So if it is from a well-known file extension, when they encrypt it, like the log bits or black cat, etc., then this can be clearly detected. And then there are a lot of ways by which you can update or keep on updating the detection models with the other file extensions too. And then there are other mechanisms to really identify the ransomware, like they sometimes, put a suffix to the file extension and then they encrypt the file for blackmailing. Similarly, then there are machine-based learning mechanisms, which are called as pre and post snapshot-based data, wherein they compare the metadata of snapshots. And there are a lot of features which quickly can get extracted to create a baseline model and then identify the anomalies between different file system snapshots that have been taken. Well, it is not an either or situation, which means that you cannot say replace whether I am taking an immutable backup in the data center itself. So why I need a isolated recovery environment, which is more or less doing the same thing. So if you look at it, you are putting up an agent on all the servers and application servers. You are getting the backup of configurations, the application data, the unstructured data, and then also from the structured data using, say, Oracle or native other tools. And you are centralizing all the configuration data, snapshot data to writing immutable any which ways. So when you have a copy of the backup, what really additional benefit you get by creating a storage-based isolated recovery environment, say, which connects once in a day or once twice in a day, depending on what kind of backup and what is our RTO and RPO that we are addressing, it copies the same data. I think there are two benefits. One is that the scanning that happens takes long time and it scans everything, including binaries. And with a deep scanning, it considers as a clean copy. The second is that it is, while very similar to how VM replicas, are not backup, but they are replicas. Similarly, both technologies exist in the organization to recover the data faster, and it only increases the chance of successful recovery because it's an isolated one. So, to some extent, we can be sure that if there are binaries which may not be detailed scan when through anti-malware when they were getting backed up, are really getting scanned here in the isolated recovery environment or a storage-based data model. Now, as I said, there are two components. One is a data domain or a vault. So vault basically stores your isolated and immutable copy, which is scanned for anomalies and perform data integrity checks and malware. And then once it is free, it is considered as a clean copy. And then you have a concept of a clean room. Clean room is a place wherein you keep your server infrastructure, your network devices, your security devices. And then once the data is copied, it is considered as clean copy. You move the data to these servers, which means that you rebuild the application, rebuild the Active Directory, rebuild your network infrastructure, security infrastructure like SIM, EDR, Active Directory, etc., in this clean room. And the idea is that when your DC and DR both gets encrypted, you cannot really use the DC because the servers are needed for forensics purpose. Hence, you need a place where all of your critical applications and all the associated dependencies are there so that you can run the operations relatively quickly. So if you have this data center, you typically have backup servers. There are agents installed on all virtual machines, application systems, network devices, security devices. They take the backup to this backup servers, which then gets copied to a backup appliance, which then through air gap network, as I said, air gap means it is disconnected, but it gets connected only for say an hour or so, depending on the type of data or the volume of data that needs to be copied. It can be sometimes as low as 10-15 minutes. All of this data gets copied to a backup or a data vault. So in this data vault, you have another data appliance where the data gets copied. I put up a data diode, or you can put up a firewall because of one-way traffic. And then you can get it back after malware scanning to backup servers. And once it is getting copied to the backup servers, you can move the data to the clean room. So you have a clean room, again separated by either a data diode or a firewall. And then you start to restore and rebuild so that you do not waste time in rebuilding either the server infrastructure, which is being used at DR. Here you can have all critical applications uh, installed, pre-configured, and you can keep on updating the configurations. You can update the binaries, you can update the patches, you can update the data, all based on what backups you are getting. So you are getting the updated patches, updated application versions, updated say, EDR signatures, etc. And you can put all of this into the clean room. So once you keep on updating your clean room, say every day, then when you are restoring or when you want to put up your clean room back, it takes minimal time and you are back on your feet. And you generally have an OOB environment to administer that. You have security and network devices. As I said, this is a completely segregated environment. And you also have your own firewalls and alternate internet links too. And you just change few configurations once you are very sure that the copies are clean, the data has been backed up, the indicator of compromises has been updated. And because it's an isolated environment, the good part is that if you are doing preliminary investigation, like trying to read the extension of the ransomware file, trying to see the ransomware node, and also look at few logs at Active Directory. And before it got encrypted, looking at the logs at EDR, if you are able to correlate it's a particular family of malware, then you will have a lot of indicator of compromise like use of mimikatz or rclone or certain set of IP addresses which have gone out. And you can block those IP addresses, block those malware extensions, update your EDR and anti-malware signatures. And then when you are confident, then only you can bring your isolated recovery environment back into the production. It may take 4 hours or it may take 40 hours, but the idea is that you are reducing a lot of time. Instead of trying to rebuild the entire systems, you have systems which are rebuilt as good as last day's data, and you are just updating the data and the IOCs. And once you are confident that you have got reasonably good handle on the indicator of compromise, and you can have heightened monitoring, and then you can bring back the isolated recovery environment in the clean room environment. And then you will obviously have to have a backup so that if you are running the clean room for 3, 4, 5, 10 days, you will still have the latest copy of data. And once the primary data center comes back or a DR, you are able to replicate the data and configurations back to it. So what are the benefits? As I said, you have faster recovery time. You are not going to the DR, not trying to rebuild the servers. Of course, it is costly because if you have, say, 25 to 30 critical applications behind a load balancer and you want a particular level of service, you will end up installing, say, 50, 100 servers. You will have a need for a huge amount of storage. You will need licenses. Along with that, you will need a dedicated network, firewall, switches, core, and access both, and also a set of workstations because people will be working from isolated environment. You do not want people to use their own desktops, which are put in the DC or DR. So even if people have laptops, which are being used in the data center, because the data center is corrupt, people are accessing application through that, Active Directory through that, file servers through that, intranet through that, you may not want them to use. So whatever is required, you end up putting up the minimum requirement of workstations also in the IRE or clean room to run it. And it can bypass certain limitations because you will need forensics and hence you are limited to not really use the servers. It's a clean environment and you have enhanced security because of one-way traffic. Future trends, while it's an upcoming uh, service, there are quite a few vendors who are already providing different type of solutions. There are some vendors who are only providing you with a data vault service, but there are others who are providing additional storage and clean room either on the cloud, or there are quite a few vendors who are providing it on in your own data center. So it's kind of mini data center, a third center, which is an isolated, which is being kept there. And it has AI-powered threat detection, cloud-based IRE solutions, automated recovery orchestration solutions, which will help you orchestrate and identify different snapshots of file systems which were clean, and then take additional file systems, scan it, and then bring it back. And then you also have quantum-resistant encryption, which means the key dynamically changes so that you can protect it against the encryption algorithms which can be broken by supercomputers. So that's all for isolated recovery environment. Do let me know your feedback, and I will see you in the next video on how do we do the incident response uh, specifically within the first few hours, and then we initiate or invoke the isolated recovery environment. Till that time, see you. Thank you. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and also press the bell icon to stay notified of all the future released videos. See you in the next one. Thank you.